Welcome, welcome, welcome to this edition of I'm Not Crazy, but with Dr. Rhonda Mattox. I'm Dr. Rhonda Mattox, and I want to welcome you to today's edition. We are talking about the other four-letter word, therapy. And in the community, many times Black men do not want any part of it. Family, I went on a fact finding session and I talked to a number of men about why they were not remotely interested in therapy, and you would be amazed at what they had to say. Today, we are tackling the real reasons Black men don't want therapy, and it is not what you imagine it to be. I have an all star cast of men who are here to help explain that. And while I'm introducing each of them, please do what you do. Rep your city, drop who you are and where you're from in the comments so we can know who is represented here. Now, I will begin by introducing the amazing all-star cast in none other than first, a person who needs no introduction, and that is our very own Ellis Dean, who is a former counselor in another life. We also have student doctor Quincy, who is the president of the Student National Medical Association. We have one of my favorites, Dr. Stephen Broughton, who is a veteran in the industry. He is a seasoned psychiatrist who works with a lot of people in the community as well as in the justice system. And then we have one of our favorites, and that is none other than the Dr. Griggs. Join me in welcoming them to our virtual lectern. We're so glad that you're joining us, Jennifer Owens, and all of you who have been joining on. And I will just start by talking about the fact that I had so many reasons that I thought men were not getting therapy. And some of it was, stuff like, oh, pride or ego. But as I started to talk to some of you all, you talked about sometimes having those moments that you shared either with parents or with different ones who that was later weaponized against you. I could definitely relate to sharing some personal information with my mother and then coming into the room and hearing her tell her sisters about it. I didn't appreciate that. And I imagine you don't, as either. Additionally, in relationships, sometimes you share your heart with people and then they turn around and in the middle of an argument, they throw it back at you. And it feels like being vulnerable can sometimes be, it's a sacred thing in the moment, but other times it can be used against you. So we're just going to start with that question. And then we're going to end. We're not just going to be talking about why Black men don't want therapy. Then we're going to also use some of these brilliant minds on the platform to discuss ways that you can navigate getting into therapy, overcoming some of those obstacles, those thoughts that would keep you from getting it. And then if you are a woman who is on here, not for yourself, but to convince your son, your husband, your nephew that he needs to get it, you're in the right place. We want to help you out as well. So let's jump in with what are some of the reasons that you think men, particularly Black men, refuse to get therapy? And Ellis, because you are the teacher's pet, I'm going to start with you. Don't tell the others I said that, okay?
Well, you laid out a good number of reasons, and I'm going to kind of open those up a little bit more and put some context around what you were saying. You said one of the dirty words, which is the V word, which is vulnerability, right? And so to be vulnerable allows yourself, it's a double-edged sword, because when you're vulnerable, it allows you to become closer to somebody, but it also allows you to be hurt by that person. And so when we're talking about, so there's a fear, inherent conscious or unconscious fear of vulnerability. So that's one obstacle. Two, in that there's you also talked about the weaponization of that information, right? So if I share something that's confidential, that's opening me up to that vulnerability, and then you in turn weaponize that even to the simple thing of sharing with somebody else. When I shared it to you in confidence and you share it with somebody else, then now not only was I vulnerable, that made me uncomfortable, but now you've weaponized it and you've made it much harder for me to open up again. The third thing I will add, because I don't want to make this a show about Ellis, and we've got some brilliant minds here, is the third thing I would add is societal expectations, right? And how much do they play a role in what is masculine and what isn't? And so we see therapy has been equated to a feminine trait, a feminine characteristic, feminine behavior. And so we say, wait a minute, that's what the women do when they go on a girls' trip, when they talking and they get their nails done and stuff like that. We don't do anything like that. We might go play some basketball, say, hey man, you all right? Yeah, I'm good. And that's it. We move on because it's not considered something that we naturally are really conditioned to from childhood to adulthood. And so when we're talking about learning a new behavior, we're going to learn that behavior of seeking counseling, seeking therapy as an adult when we haven't been indoctrinated. That's a bad word, I know today, but in terms of that behavior as a child. So I'll shut up there and let some of the other smarter brothers talk.
I like it. I like it. I like it. Let's get a different perspective. Anybody else want to jump in? Those were great points. Vulnerability, you know, indoctrination. Great, great points. Anyone want to add to something he said or expand upon something he said?
Sure. He nailed it. I mean, basically, as we've been taught since we were little boys, when you fall down and hurt yourself, boys don't cry. Mm-hmm. We've been taught all our lives that it's more important to hide your feelings because they only reveal weaknesses. Mm-hmm. So the stigma associated with not only with mental health, but in general, but the stigma that's associated with Black men in terms of showing any trait that doesn't show them in the hardest light. Everybody wants to be hard nowadays. Nobody wants to have any soft side to them because they feel that that's just too feminine. And we've been basically taught since being little kids that you have to not cry, not show emotion, and suck it up.
Mm-hmm. Those are great points. Man up, so to speak. And even though we say stuff like, you know, show your emotions, be vulnerable, when we see people like Will Smith or Michael Jordan show emotion and have tears, they end up as memes that are shared across the nation with very, very funny, you know, words attached. And yet it points to a larger issue that vulnerability is weaponized in our communities and you become the butt of the joke. I saw someone say that they were in Brooklyn, New York, and they wanted their son to, I don't want you to have to wait till the end of the show for me to tell you. There are certain directories like psychologytoday.com or Therapy for Black Men that you can go to and type in your zip code, and a bio and many times a picture will pop up so that you can see something about them, as well as perhaps see what their race or ethnicity is. So I didn't want to save that to the end, and we'll have that circulate on our banner below so that you can see that. But some really, really good points, Dr. Broughton. Dr. Griggs, I saw you unmute. What do you want to add to that or expand upon?
So I have a perspective that kind of touches, I have a couple of perspectives that broach on that. You know, part of the issue is that we know for the last 40 years, it's shown that you feel more comfortable seeing a therapist that looks like you. There's a scarcity of Black male doctors, particularly in the psychiatric field and the psychology field. So you have an issue when we find Black psychiatrists, male psychiatrists, and psychologists. You would think they'd be overbooked, but because there's a scarcity on both sides of Black men that are willing and Black men that are able, we end up with a crisis, a lot of Black men in crisis. Now that takes us back to the word vulnerability that Dr. Broughton and Ellis brought up earlier. If you go back to when we were first brought here, any signs of weakness or vulnerability were for lack of a better term, bred out. It was a very unnatural selection if you were considered off the normal, off the mental normal. So how are you today? I'm fine, boss. Are you good? I'm fine. How do you feel? I'm fine. We have been generationally conditioned to hide our emotions, and we're seeing the consequence of it. We had a show that we did the other night, Ellis and I did, and we talked about Black health, particularly in men through the generations. You didn't go to a doctor for anything unless there was an emergency. If you had a broken bone, you go lay down, drink some water, go lay down, and I'm gonna get that water bag and take you some Robitussin, you'll be fine. Now, and if it was a mental issue, it was something that was, you definitely, as a Black male, didn't let on to. And if there was something that was found to be that you needed some help, family-wise, it was seen as something to be embarrassed about or a weakness in the family. And again, that goes back how many hundreds of years? That if it was a weakness, your family possibly was bred out or artificially selected against. Am I using my words right, Ellis? Am I being professionally correct with this? But it's something that we have to approach again, because what's happening as a consequence of us being tough guys, we are becoming an endangered species through all of the other non-psychiatric issues like hypertension, diabetes, all of the issues of stress. So we have to learn to open ourselves up. Before we even can broach the term of therapist, we have to be able to open ourselves up to each other in the community beyond the barbershop. And I'll leave it there.
Oh, so many golden nuggets. Historically conditioned, selectively selected, all of those. And I love that you ended with a safe place for us has traditionally been the barbershop. I love that, because that is the de facto mental health facility for many of us. But the other, and Dr. Broughton, you'll appreciate this, one of the largest mental health hospitals, so to speak, is actually the prison system. And so for those of us who elect to not show emotion, unfortunately, sometimes we end up blowing up and ending up in a different place. And I'll bring that home a little bit later, because I want to the good student, Dr. Quincy Gregg, to be able to weigh in on this as well, if he'd like to.
Sure. I guess I'll just add, I think everybody who spoke is 100% absolutely right, correct. And I just want to say, even now, knowing all this information, knowing how we're disadvantaged, knowing how, being vulnerable is, something we're not used to, something that we're taught by societal norms. It's still uncomfortable now to be vulnerable, even though I know it'll be beneficial for me, because I've been spending my whole life, having that shield up, having that guard up, doing what I'm supposed to do to kind of survive and, navigate this world specifically not meant for a Black man. Being vulnerable is still very uncomfortable, and it is a process. I do have to work every day, even opening up to some of my friends, even opening up to some of my family who I know may tell my business and it might be out there, but sometimes I'll be like, okay, this is something that might happen. It's not the end of the world. I still want to share this side of me with them.
Mm-hmm. And that is really, really important. You mentioned some golden nuggets. Sometimes we don't share because we are afraid of who is going to find out that we have shared. And that's one of the real gems of getting therapy or being seen by a licensed mental health professional, is that they are paid and legally bound to maintain your confidentiality. Now, here's the issue. When I obviously needed therapy for everybody in the world and everybody around me knew I needed it except for me. I just had absolutely no insight into it. And the backstory is my mother had died. I was not cleaning my room. I was not going to class. I was truly in jeopardy of flunking out of medical school, because this happened around the time of my boards, and I could not advance if I didn't pass those boards. But the issue was I wasn't studying. And I didn't see myself as depressed, believe it or not. But I looked the part of depression. You ever walked into a room and you could feel the depression in there? That's what I was. And I remember my dean telling me, I think you're depressed. And the way I deciphered that was like a 4-letter word, literally. And he said, I think you need to see someone. And I had no interest in seeing anybody. How do you communicate with someone that you love, who obviously is in pain, who needs some help, that therapy is something they should consider without insulting them. Because even though he was delicate in his approach, in my mind, I heard you were crazy and you need help. And then what I thought of with people who needed help was someone who then would land in an insane asylum. Even though I was a medical student, I had all these stigmatizing beliefs. How do you help someone who needs it get the help without alienating them or stigmatizing them?
Well, one thing you do is you make it less of a stigma. You be a friend. You be a person that shows concern and cares for them. One of the things that we often do is we jump to the final point of treatment rather than the beginning point. People don't want to hear go to a psychiatrist, but they might listen to, hey, I see that something's troubling you. You want to talk about it? I'm here for you if you want to talk about it. By being a friend initially, and then hopefully getting them to open up a little bit, you could also make suggestions. If it's something that you don't want to talk to me about, have you thought about talking to your pastor or talking to somebody that you feel comfortable with? But you seem like you're holding a lot in and it's just stressing you, and I can just see it. But I'm concerned about you, and I just want you to do whatever you feel is going to help. Refer them to their family physician.
Yeah.
First thing you can do in terms of medical care is you talk to your doctor about it. Sometimes we have things going on in our body that we don't recognize. It can be electrolyte imbalances. You make them feel like it's something other than mental health,
Right.
because they'll eventually accept mental health if they accept it that it's medical health. And by destigmatizing mental health, it makes it easier for them to talk about it and go to places. Now, a couple of the things that I heard was about the barbershop. Well, we have a good friend who has created a project called the Confess Project that actually talks about mental health in barbershops. He trains barbers on how to talk about how you feel, what's going on with you. And this is so important, getting down to the grassroots and talking about things. I'm gonna say this, then I'm gonna let I see Dr. Dean wants to get into it. But I've told people at this point in time that any Black male growing up in America suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder from the time they are old enough to recognize that they are a person in this world. Because I don't know of a single Black man that has not been confronted by racism in America. I said, I had a gun put on me by a policeman when I was 15 years old. Just from walking home from school after a basketball game, that I went and played basketball for the team in my city. And they were so proud of me bouncing the ball for them, but when I was walking home, they didn't see me as that basketball player at Pine Bluff High. They saw me as somebody who's walking through a neighborhood I shouldn't be in. So the trauma of having a gun put on you at that age, the fact that we walk around in America and we have to tell our Black children, our sons in particular, how to not get killed if they're stopped at night, is trauma. That's psychological trauma that we've been dealing with all our lives. And we have to share that type of feeling with people. And that stuff, if you don't share it, it balls up inside of you and grows and grows and grows and festers. And that's why Black men in particular have a difficult time letting it out, because it's been festering a long time.
Absolutely.
I would go a little old. Y'all remember the popular movie Boys in the Hood, and when Trey, after his friend was killed, and he was in the scene and he was in the living room and all he was doing was punching in the air.
Yeah.
That's the feeling that Black men have on a regular basis, right? We connected to that scene because that's how we feel sometimes going out in the world, coming home, dealing with that type of stress, dealing with understanding that your skin makes you your gender and your skin makes you fit the profile of whatever they want you to fit.
Mm-hmm.
But you brought up some really great points in terms of friend, right? And my mother raised me to say, your friends ain't gonna tell you everything you want to hear, right? And so those are your true friends. Because if somebody is just telling you everything you want to hear, that's not a friend, that's a yes man.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if you want a true friend, they're gonna tell you some things that you want to hear, and they're gonna tell you some things that you need to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's how we've got to make that determination. So we're going to have that conversation, and you could approach that. I'm a friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other way you could approach that conversation is making it personal, right? You say, "Hey, look, I'm telling you, I'm going to be honest with you. When I was in grad school, I was having a tough time, and I sought counseling, and it was the best thing for me." So you make that personal. You take them out of the center of them needing counseling. You make it personal. You say, okay, now this is a friend. You say, oh, wow, that becomes an option for them because now they know somebody that they know, like, and trust has done it themselves. And so if you've done it, then that's another way you can kind of broach that subject with somebody that says, hey, look, I'm telling you, it's non-invasive. It's really, and it helped me out a lot, sort through some things that I might have been going through. So those are two words. But I think when we use that friend, that term friend too casually, right?
Mm-hmm.
We attach it to everything.
Facebook friend.
Yeah. Like I said.
Ellis, to your point, that's part of the process is being able to determine who your friends are. And you notice as we age, your circle gets smaller. The sooner you realize that your true friends will never expose your vulnerability for the sake of a laugh. We play a lot, and I understand we do it to diffuse some of the pain, but you should never do it at anyone's expense, particularly someone who exposes a vulnerability, something they might be embarrassed about in their family, something they might be embarrassed about for themselves. And a lot of times, and we've seen it in the locker room, out in the playground, barbershop, somebody will exploit someone's unknown vulnerability for the sake of a laugh. And that's not a friend. And the sooner you know that you're better off without that, the easier it'll be to accept that you might be vulnerable. Ellis, I'm sorry.
No. That was great, and I will echo what you said and what Ellis said. When you are to have some degree of healing, and you are comfortable sharing, that is so powerful. And I think for many of us, when we first start doing it, we feel so vulnerable. We feel the proverbial weak. And so we may be trying to hide it, like the woman who grabbed the hem of Jesus's garment and was like, I got my healing, I'm about to go and I'm gonna keep it to myself. And then they were outed. I remember being so ashamed of needing someone because my backstory that had been fed to me my whole life was strong black woman, strong black woman, strong black woman. And so for me, strong black woman meant never let them see you sweat. It meant show strength. It meant don't need anyone. It meant don't cry. And in my home, showing anything other than happiness or anger was not acceptable. And so to be on the other side of the desk, saying I'm not okay felt like a no. So when you're able to then draw from that, I've been uncomfortable doing this and I did it and it worked out for my good. If I hadn't done it, I would not be a doctor today, perhaps. When you are able to show that and share that, that can be a very powerful, motivator. Now, I'm not telling you if you're just getting started to go out and share that you are in therapy or anything like that, and because perhaps you're not at the place to where if someone attacks you, you can be firm, like, hey, this is an investment in me and my legacy, and I'm not messed up about you. But when you know that you're there, it's okay to share that this amazing person you see before you today is a result of therapy, prayer, the Lord, or journaling. Great points. Dr. Brodden, did I see you unmute, or Dr. Griggs, were you unmuting to say something?
Well, it's so good that we have discussions like this because we need information. Our people in general need information, and they need to know that it's all right to seek help, to seek therapy. You know, one of the things that you know, I'm the national chairman of health and wellness for my fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and one of the things that we've adopted is the fact that they've allowed me to have a base that I can talk about mental health. And I said, we are our brother's keeper. We have to reach out to all our brothers and talk about these things that are so important in our health. And our mental health right now, in terms of Black men in America, the saying used to be, it's the only thing I got. If we don't have that, we don't have nothing. You know, you talked about your struggles, Doc, when you were going to medical school. I dropped out of medical school because my mother had cancer. And that was my strength. I was a single parent, come from a single parent family. And when she had cancer, I dropped out because I couldn't focus at all. And it didn't mean anything. Medical school didn't mean anything without her. Mm-hmm. So I dropped out to take care of her. When she got well, I went back. But I had to show then myself that there are things that are important. And by dropping out of medical school, it showed a vulnerability, you know, because some people said you shouldn't do that. You'll never go back. Well, I went back, but I saw then that the way men are sometimes presented with things, we're presented with never show any weakness, never do anything to show that you are emotional or have concerns. But I couldn't sit up there and let my mother deal with cancer by herself.
Absolutely.
You know, that made no sense at all.
Absolutely.
And then when I went back, you know, even then when I went through medical school in the 80s, you know, my uncle had gone to medical school where we went, Doc, in the 50s. He was there during the Little Rock Central crisis. One of the first 5 or 6 Blacks that ever graduated from the University of Arkansas Medical School. I went through years later, and do you know, I got stopped in the parking lot when they had a dormitory at UAMS. I got stopped in the parking lot by the campus policemen because they said I was casing cars when I was just looking for a parking space. Had me outside the car, blue lights on, my hands on top of my hood to ask me where I was going. So like I said, we've been traumatized all our lives and don't realize it. And you have to ignore that and move on. The dean called me up to the medical school and said, you wanted to complain about this person, this campus security. And I said, yeah, I thought it was wrong. He said, do you want to be a doctor? He didn't care about my complaint. He just wanted me to not make any trouble. That's the type of pressure and mental stress that most Black men are dealing with in all facets of life.
Man.
So we have to really reach out to our people, to our brothers, and say, look, I feel you, man. I know what you're talking about. You know, I ain't talking about a person who is doing well. I'm talking about people who are struggling. You can barely pay your bills from the month to month, and you're dealing with the same pressures we're dealing with, and we supposedly have made it. Think of the pressure and the stress that their mind is going through.
Yeah, I think Dr. Brown. I think it was Joyce DeGraw that called it post-traumatic slave disorder, right? And it talks how we move that forward. My question, really, and I'm switching back to my hosting hat, so I'm sorry, Dr. Mattox, I can't get host screen. But Quincy, from as a representative of the younger generation here, because I would assume most of us on here have seen some decades. I'm not going to say how many, but we've seen a handful. We'll call it a handful of decades in our life. Has there been a shift in having more open conversations amongst younger men, or is it still that same shield of that armor of I've got to be strong, tough in all situations and all scenarios?
Yes, I definitely feel like there's a big shift. I feel like currently we are more of in a mental health boom. Social media, the media, they're kind of emphasizing mental health and the importance of it right now. Like at one point in time, I think especially in the Black community, we thought mental health was kind of made up, something you can kind of shake off. And now a lot of us, we know it's real. And so we're kind of addressing it. Like I recently, like this past semester, I started seeking therapy myself. And just by me seeking therapy and like y'all said, sharing and kind of normalizing the process, like when I mention it to my friends, which I'm not afraid to mention if they're my friends, and they're asking me questions like, how did you do that? Like what type of insurance you have? Like how did you find your therapist? How do you like it? So like we are having those conversations. There is dialogue. And I feel like it's normalized. I think a lot of people make the point of saying like just the way you go to the doctor and get a physical checkup, it's just important to do the same thing, with your mind.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. One of the questions that are in our comments, and thank you for those of you who are dropping where you're from, repping your city in your comments. I see them. I'm just going to acknowledge a few. Mr. Myers said, "I'm not afraid to show my emotions, yet I want God to guide them correctly. For example, during a homecoming for a new friend's granddad, I didn't know him yet. Getting to know her allowed me to cry openly alongside her." I have another, I think Miss Murphy, ask us a specific question. How receptive would Black men be to Black women mental health providers? And so I'll pose that because sometimes I have, particularly women of young sons, maybe in single parent homes, reach out to me specifically requesting a Black male therapist. But then I do have some adult Black men who specifically prefer a woman therapist because sometimes they have these thoughts about what a Black male therapist would be like. What have been your experiences with that?
Well, that's a double-edged sword, Doc. Some men, if they're going to be vulnerable, they'd rather be vulnerable to a female or a Black woman mental health provider than a male because they don't want their peer, or I should say, another man looking at them and they even though it's not happening, they don't want them to judge them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I think it's like when I went to with my wife and I went and got a manicure and a pedicure.
Mm-hmm.
I felt great. It's good for older people to make sure that you got circulation in those feet and everything and get the nails done properly and all that. But at the same time, when they try to give me a man to do it, I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I want no man holding my hand and playing with my feet. So it's about the same way when you talk about mental health providers in some instances. The same way. Men think of it the same way. I don't want to be perceived as being soft to another man, whereas I can talk to another woman and that she can feel for me. It's like I'm talking to my mama or my grandmama rather than talking to my dad or my grandpa.
And sometimes, and that's a really good point. I think sometimes it depends on the issue because the earlier issues that you talked about in terms of maybe feeling singled out by a police, perhaps after an experience like that, you prefer another Black man because you know that they can relate. But if it is related to maybe relationship issues with your girlfriend, maybe you don't want a man for that because you think, oh, they're going to think I'm weak. And I just want to go on the record and clear the air that I would really like for us to evict words like weak and strong and think about it more as human. Okay. I'm having a human moment with a loss, with a relationship crisis. And this is really not about being weak or strong. It's about having a human connection that is in jeopardy of being disrupted. And I'm feeling some kind of way about it. Okay. So I think I've seen that as well. Dean, Dr. Griggs, Quincy, either of you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm kind of ambivalent. I think it's more a matter of trust and connection. The big issue with the whole mental and mental illness conversation is that there's not a line of delineation. And because there's not a line, there's stigma. Now that leads to the issue of trust. I don't think most men trust that if I divulge my deepest secrets, that it's going to stay in that room. I think with medical conditions, it's different because in the community, they think, well, doctor, they have to be quiet about my private business. And there's still certain issues that men won't go to the doctor for because they'll go to a doctor out of town, or they'll try to see if there's another way to not go to the doctor, because it's a lot of times the community is really small, and you might see that person out in a social setting and you're scared they might get a little tipsy and all of your business going to come out. So, I mean, there's that trust, that it's another layer of distrust. And Ellis, we talked about distrust and mistrust, based on experiences, added to the mis and distrust we have with the system to begin with. And I'm sorry that, I never have these internet challenges, but I'm having them. So I got to get it in when I can. In between, I'm gonna go get me a piece of foil paper and a coat hanger, and hopefully I can stay with y'all.
It's all right.
But there's other thing. The big thing we don't bring up is the fact that, a lot of men don't want that on their record. They go for insurances. They're worried about what rates, and they're worried about who find out and how it might affect them moving forward.
Oh, that is a great point. For those of you who are just joining us, we are talking about the other four-letter word, therapy, and the real reasons Black men don't want it. Dr. Griggs just nailed a point in that they may not want it to be a part of their medical record, because it may, particularly military men, I've heard them say that they have concerns about advancing in the military. And so I do have people, a matter of fact, I had a woman today tell me she had insurance and she will be paying out of pocket. And I have no idea what her industry is, but for professional reasons, she was choosing to pay out of pocket. And I could relate to that because I know that was one of the marketing pieces that someone sold to me for paying out of pocket. And I paid out of pocket for that reason, because when I first got started in medicine, on our application, it would ask, have you ever been seen by a mental health provider? And someone who was being seen by a psychiatrist, I think you remember Dr. Kara, lobbied to get that question removed, because that was on there, many physicians and people who needed it would not actually go see a psychiatrist because they were afraid that they would have to check the yes box and that would be used against them. So that is great, and actually something I hadn't thought about. Did anyone else want to weigh in before I move on?
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, and it's like a chicken or the egg argument. Like, you have to have some self-awareness. But if you have self-awareness, you might not need therapy. So that's part of it. But the self-awareness comes in and says, okay, we might assume that a woman can give us more compassion, right? Because that's the socialization that girls have. And so you think, hey, I might get more compassion from a female therapist versus a male therapist. And I might need that more in that moment. Or having a male therapist might be triggering. If you didn't have a good relationship with your father or other male figures in your life, that could be a triggering moment that could cause that relationship not to form properly, and you won't have the best therapeutic experience. And so again, that requires some self-awareness that person may or may not have going into a therapeutic situation. So it is tough. It's really about preference. I'm with you, Dr. Stephen. I get a pedicure on a regular basis. I'm proud to say it. I like to have my feet. I like to go all the way up to my kneecap. I'm proud to tell you. But I'm with you. I'd like to have a woman, but she got to have some strong hands because these calves need some work. Okay. So, uh,
Same thing with massages.
Absolutely. That's what I was thinking about.
So I'm with you on that. So it's a narrow criteria, right? I need you to be a woman, but I need you to have some strength because I got some knots and some things and some crusty on my feet that I don't think if you got soft hands, you can't take any of these.
Yes.
Well, another
Now,
good
this-
point
Ellis,
that
I
Dr.
want you guys
just to
to
remind you,
share
Ellis,
this.
it's lunchtime somewhere. Some lunchtime.
Yes.
another good
Talking
point
about your
that
crusty feet.
Dr. Griggs made another good point, and that was about trust and shared experiences, and that's important as well. I've been with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department for going on 15 years, and I was actually trained as a part-time deputy, so I'm certified by law enforcement in the state of Arkansas. But one of the things that I found, and I'd done extensive reading on it, was the fact that law enforcement officers, because of what they have to do, and this was the same way in the military when I was in the military, they want people who understand what they're going through, like experiences, similar experiences and everything. So they are more inclined to talk to somebody who understands exactly what they're going through. I've done rides with deputies if they've been exposed to any trauma, acute stress type stuff like fatal car accidents, finding bodies in various places and after homicides and stuff like suicides and stuff like that. And it's pretty distressing.
Mhm.
And a lot of them take that home with them and they internalize it because they have nobody to talk to. But once I got on the force, they were able to have somebody they could talk to that basically deprogrammed them and debriefed them and had them come down from that acute stress. And they were able to tolerate it better. And we felt we had less people missing work after exposures of that kind. Everybody was doing a lot better. So experiences that are shared or common are create a significant amount of trust, and trust is a very significant part of therapy.
That is a great point. I will say, particularly after the George Floyd, I had friends that I'd gone to school with who were in the justice system who reached out because they were Black men. Of course, there was this experience, and many in the community, in the Black community, saw them as the enemy, but they were not. At least the individuals that I spoke with did not feel like they were a part of the Blue community because the Blue community also saw them with mistrust. And so it was almost like they were amphibians walking in two worlds, but didn't feel like they had a home. That shared experience is so important. I started to have, I think in my 20 years of practicing, I'd never had a police officer until George Floyd. And then I started having sheriffs, deputies, just regular people from the force. And that was the case with teachers as well. I think I'd only had one teacher the entire time I was working. And then my caseload looked like the who's who of Arkansas, from judges to police officers to teachers, nurses, other doctors. And I think a part of that, though, was the fact that I was online. And so they did not have to fear their cars being seen in the parking lot or who they were going to be seen by in the waiting room. How important is the opportunity to have online work for people to consider that? Because then you cut out I got to drive across town. Somebody might see me, that kind of thing. How important is that to perhaps a Black man or any person's willingness to get therapy, do you think?
It changed the game. It changed the game.
Yeah. So if I can speak to that, so it changes the game, Ellis. You're right in that I'm on my own turf. I'm in my safe space. It's as simple as if I don't like this, it helps objectify the experience and protects it. It's a layer of protection. I can just press leave and never have to see you again. But the thing is, you bring up a great point, though, and I want to go back to, I'm sorry, I just can't help, Ellis, I can't help but talk about the history The sad thing about this, the more that we have platforms like this, we did this before, Dr. Mattox, if you remember, this is a ubiquitous experience to all Black men. And the thing, you talk about being human, I'm having a human moment right now because it makes me emotional that the talk has not changed since slavery. All Black men, these cops, these doctors, these teachers, these judges, all of us have had to have the same talk from our parents who got it from their parents, who got it from their parents. They've had the same level of worry when they leave the house, particularly at night, especially when you're boys, teenagers, and young 20s, when you're bucks and just wild and you're growing. You have the concern of how to conduct yourself safely, even and especially when you're not doing anything that could be nefarious. It's the same. So it's generational trauma that has to be perpetuated in order to protect our future, our babies and our future generations. So there's that anger, and the inner angst comes from generations, hundreds of years of frustration because nothing has changed in the talk. The talk is the same thing. You need to conduct yourself a certain way. Don't dress a certain way. Avert your eyes. You Don't get argumentative, because all you want your child to do, all you want the men in your family to do, all you want the men in your family to do is come home. So whether you choose a law enforcement, a career in law enforcement, medicine, business, the communications, media, whatever, we've all gotten the exact same talk. And the part of that frustration is that we're all doing our part to change it. But at the end of the day, we have to give the same speech for preservation of species.
And it's interesting that you say this, because you were part of the talk that we did. We for those of you who are just tuning in, we Dr. Griggs, I think Ellis, and some others of us did a show called The Talk: Every Black Parent's Nightmare, Navigating Police Brutality. And for me, that talk is as important as suicide prevention in my world. It is as important as getting screened for heart disease, the number one killer of women. It is as important as getting screened for colon cancer, the number 3 killer. It is, and I don't even know if I want to say as important, or if not more important, because if we don't have this conversation, and our youth's only exposure is to some scene in a movie where the person is getting smart with the police officer and behaving in a certain way, this can end up an unnecessary fatality. And so this is one of those important talks that I actually got pushback from in the community for wanting to bring it to an organization, a national organization, medical organization, of people saying, we will not give you dollars if you do this talk. Now, guess what talk is going to happen for certain? That talk is happening because this is a prevention talk that I cannot afford to be intimidated, manipulated, or any other aided. We have to have this conversation. And it is my desire for us to have this conversation across the globe, particularly as it relates to Black people dying unnecessarily. And obviously, this is a point of a point of passion for us on here, and I think that I have some like-minded people, and it speaks to the fact that we need to have another show on this very soon that I'm certain Dr. Brodden, Dr. Griggs, and Ellis Dean will be a part of. As we are preparing to, I almost don't even want to go back to the other, but I will, for the integrity and the congruence of the show, go back to, what do you tell Black men will be the benefit of therapy for those who are questioning the value of it? What 2 or 3 things would you leave the person who's watching this, who is now kind of on the fence about whether they should go, or the person who loves them that's watching this saying, hey, how do I get my husband, my boyfriend, my mom, my father to consider therapy? What do you say to that? And Dr. Griggs, you've been the quietest one on the bunch, so I'll lead with you.
No, I've just been listening to everybody's wisdom. I've been really enjoying their words. I feel like I'm learning as well. But personally, for me, because I just started therapy, and I know because the lifestyle I'm living right now, I don't really have the opportunity to share how I'm feeling or venting. I'm not married. I'm single. I spend a lot of time by myself. I know absolutely. I just needed somewhere to vent. I needed somewhere to, I need someone to hear my thoughts. Sometimes I just need validation in this world I'm navigating right now, that I'm doing things correctly. That sometimes if I'm navigating a certain room and I felt uncomfortable, I need validation that it wasn't just me overreacting. So
Mhm.
I say, if anything, um, it it's good just to share your feelings with other people, because you can't hold that in. You can't hold it in. And I know stress, you hear all the statistics, the number one killer. I feel like stress is from the accumulation of holding in thoughts you need to get out. And so that'd be probably be my number one takeaway, especially when you don't necessarily have that support system you've been used to. You're away from home. So that really applies to a lot of people my age. And I think that's a very easy selling point to people who are look like me or in a similar lifestyle as me currently.
Okay, a place to vent. I love it.
That was
A
a word
place
right
to
there. Validation was a word. You said a word. That'll preach right
yes,
there. Validation.
yes. Validation, affirmation, to vent, to have someone who can hold your truths in your sacred place
Hmm.
without concern about it being shared unnecessarily or weaponized. Um, I don't know who else is the quietest one, because I think all the rest of you have been talking. So you guys just jump in.
I think he nailed it. I think he really nailed it. I mean, especially from the younger generation, that's the stuff we need to hear. Like, just, a lot of times you want someone to tell you you're wrong or you're right, or give you another perspective to think about it. And the interesting thing, if you can't find a real friend, you can find a real therapist.
Mhm, mhm.
You know, the only thing, one thing that helped me in that process is on social media. I use Facebook. I'm part of that generation use Facebook, so I know it's the young generation. Y'all are TikTokers and Snapchatters and things like that. But on Facebook, what I would do is every once in a while I would write a post and I would call it Transparency 101. And I would just say something I had been feeling, something I had been going through, and I would put that out in the public space. One, when you're typing it on your phone or on your laptop, you're in a safe space, right? Nobody's around you. I'm not sharing. I don't have to have that human to human contact to share what's going on. So now I feel more comfortable. And then what happens, and what has happened in those moments is, one, I've given other people the validation to say yes. I'm feeling that same way. And so you get other people that put their comments underneath there and they go, wow, I'm so glad you posted this because I've been thinking the same thing. So now you realize there's a community of people that are feeling the same way, and they're giving you that validation that Quincy was talking about in terms of, so that is a safe way to get some of those emotions out and get that, because most of the people that you're friends with on Facebook are your friends. They're going to give you that. They're going to give you some feedback. Oh, you're not overreacting. Oh, no, no, that's okay. I've been feeling the same way. And so that way, every time I've written something like that, I've gotten so many great responses that I feel better. So it was almost like a little mini therapy session for me. Last thing I will say as we're wrapping up the show is it's okay to cry. Men, crying is therapeutic.
Yes.
There is some actual physical things that happen to your body when you cry. So if you're watching a movie and it's sensitive, you can go ahead and let it out. You ain't got you, you can let it out because that is a cathartic experience for you and your emotions. So it is okay. I know we've been told since a zygote, I'm going all the way back, that we're not supposed to cry. But I promise you, there is something very, very therapeutic about that physically and emotionally. So that's the last thing I'm gonna say.
Yes, Dr. Griggs, he said zygote. I love it. I love it. I love it. Listen, he just said tears are not terrorists. They are therapeutic. That was my take on what he said. They're not, and you can also just that vulnerability moment, that sharing can be therapeutic as well. And of course, I'm just going to say again and again, When you do this in a setting with a licensed mental health professional, we are bound by HIPAA. You will not see your information on Snapchat, Instagram, Discord, whatever social media is the way. Dr. Griggs, you look like you wanted to say something.
No, I was just thinking tears are not terrorists, validation, venting, like I'm picking up a lot. Like I mean, just buzzword. I'm letting y'all know I'm stealing them as we speak. Y'all just don't be mad and don't be surprised. Yeah. All of this stuff is really, really helpful. I just don't want to have images of Ellis's crusty feet before I go to lunch. That's all.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
well, I just want to say that
I'm about to send you a picture of my crusty feet right now. As soon as we get off this call, yes.
Well, I just want to say that it's an old saying, but it's true. It takes a village, and men in particular need to look to the elders.
Yes,
because you don't get to be an elder without a little bit of wisdom. We got some old fools, I know, but you get to be an elder if you have a little bit of wisdom. And we can help each other just by having conversations so that they know that, one, they're not by themselves. They're not going through anything that we haven't all gone through, particularly what has traumatized all Black men since birth in America. So elders can tell you a lot on how to make it and how to survive. So, and survival is key for our village to survive.
Absolutely.
Our strong Black women need strong, healthy, mentally healthy men.
Yes, we do, Dr. Brodden. Yes, absolutely. I want to take this opportunity to thank each of our audience members for staying in tune the whole time. I want to challenge you. If you can even think of one person that you thought, oh, I wish such and such was hearing this, share this on your timeline so that others can receive the benefit of the wisdom on this virtual lectern right now, virtual platform. I want to thank you, Ellis, you, Quincy, you, Dr. Griggs, and you, Dr. Brodden, for taking time away from your busy practices and your work to share these golden nuggets with us. I think, family, if you were listening and tuned in like I was, you understand that we are going to have a follow-up to the earlier talk that we had, because that obviously was not enough. And I will not confirm them in your presence right now, but let's just say wink, wink, stay tuned for next week. I think I'm going to have an exciting lineup for you. I'm going to try to pivot just a little bit and move over something that I had intended for you for this very passionate talk that I see all of the young men, young and seasoned men want to have on this. And I want you to know I am here for it. Again, as always, thank you for tuning into I'm Not Crazy, but I Need Affirmation. I need someone to talk to. I need someone who understands. I need someone who won't interrupt me. And more than that, I need a village. Thank you, Dr. Brodden, Dr. Griggs, future Dr. Greg, and Ellis Dean for sharing your day with us. I want to encourage you to step outside of your comfort zone, make an impact, and share this video. Ellis, get a picture of us. Wait a minute.
I'm gonna put it next to my picture of my feet.
Oh, man. Just so y'all know, I'm skipping lunch. I am skipping lunch. I'm skipping lunch.
Yes. We'll post a picture of his feet as well. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
You got it.